Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you here. I'm Dr. David Hopkins, humanities professor, and glad to have you along for the ride today. This podcast or lesson or whatever you want to call it is very exciting for me. We stay in China and we continue to study ancient wisdom texts, this time from chapter number 6. And it's from really an era we're staying right in that intellectual heavyweights from China. And I highly recommend, though, a couple things to maximize your time on this podcast and your overall personal understanding and growth and development. I would love to have you read along with me from the text that I'm reading. Heck, you can go back to college without tuition and any annoying parking problems. So, first of all, here's what you should do if you really want to maximize this. Number 1, subscribe to the free Substack course. That link is posted in the description. And then number 2, get the book we're studying, Readings in Ethics, Moral Wisdom, Past and Present. We're reading through this book page by page, chapter by chapter, one podcast per week. And yeah, sure, you can just listen in on the podcast, get everything you need to understand about the talk today. But I'm telling you, if you read the book and then listen to the podcast and engage in the Substack material, your understanding of morality, wisdom, some of the greatest works of all time, it's just going to grow exponentially. So the Substack link is in the description below, so check that out. But enough of the introductory material. Let's go ahead and get going. This week we study an amazing human being, the name Kongzai, and he lived from 551 to 479 BC. But the name Kongzai probably doesn't mean anything to you. As for us in the West, he's known as Confucius. And he is generally considered the most eminent thinker in classical Chinese tradition. The character of Kong, if we're just going to break down the name quick, is a surname. And Zi is an honorific term or word that has traditionally been applied to intellectually superior thinkers. Such as Lao Tse, he had that, which we studied last week. The name Kongzai is usually translated as Master Kong. But for our purposes, again, let's just go by the common English word Confucius. So Confucius was born in the kingdom of Lu in the spring and autumn period of ancient Chinese history. And it doesn't really mean, what's that even mean to you if you've never studied this era? It was just a period of conflict. The warring states of this particular region were fighting for control of the central plains of China. And so this period in Chinese history was marked by ferocious violence and general upheaval. And just like Lao Tse, Confucius was profoundly affected by the disorder of the time, and he wanted to recover the peace and stability of that idealized past. That yearning for the good old days is a very common human reaction to moments of strife, turmoil, and dramatic change. And I think even for all of us today, as we get older, we yearn backwards in many days for those good old days, an age where things were more clear and more simple and more happy. And Confucius was really no different in that. And we're definitely going to get a feel for that in his writings. So Confucius' personal life was plagued with family drama. His dad was an impoverished noble from all the different conflicts. And his dad even took on a new wife when he got into his 70s and he trying to produce another male offspring. I don't want to go into the baby mama drama, but let's just say the home life and family life of Confucius was not tranquil and calm. It was anything from ideal to become a preeminent scholar, just to say the least. So Confucius began his career as a minor official. He supervised public granaries, and then he got promoted and he started managing public fields and lands, and he later became even a judicial officer. So he was basically on a nice career path to be a mid-level bureaucrat. I mean, of no special note or distinction, really. Confucius was born into a class of people known as the Shi, which were kind of between aristocracy and common people. Yet somewhere along the way, he gained exposure to studying and especially literature and philosophy. And at some point, relatively early in his adult life, he kind of devoted himself to study the classics and to teaching. In this regard, he's representative of a much larger movement that was going on in China at the time, which was called the Ru, or the School of Scholars. And he becomes a teacher, and he taught from a defined curriculum, which included proprietary, or the rights of the Tao. We've talked about the rights of the Tao in the last lecture, but any music making, archery, charioteering, writing, mathematics, all these things, he became a teacher. And the focus was on the cultivation of moral character, which was believed at the time to be even more essential than just learning practical work skills. So Confucius is really a guy after my own heart, really. Heck, I've been a soldier, I've been a stock trader, I've been a hotel manager, I've been all kinds of other administrative roles in higher education, academic publishing. But in the end, I feel I'm a humanities instructor. Even the older I get, the more engrossed I am in understanding deeply the classics, thus this class, and thus us talking here about these wisdom texts. But Confucius was essentially someone who believed in a liberal arts education. And by studying the classics and history and literature and philosophy and the rights, Confucius believed students become moral individuals and they become good citizens. And like other Chinese philosophers, he was particularly interested in social and political theory. In many ways, which we haven't got to yet, Confucius was like Plato, in that he wasn't necessarily into philosophy just to sit around and talk philosophy, but rather he wanted to make a practical application of the great works and the philosophical ideas. Because if you didn't actually put anything into practice, just studying for studying's sake really didn't have any purpose. So eventually, though, he left his home. He left his home state, and he was accompanied by a group of very loyal students that he had formed bonds with over his time of studies. And he had an intention of wanting to offer his advice to rulers of the state. And that didn't go all that well, actually, and Confucius really failed to find a satisfactory position. Even though his influence was growing and people were paying attention to him, he just couldn't find that one position that he thought he could really apply the skills he'd been learning. And at the end of his life, he returned to his home state, Lu, and he compiled the 5 classics. The Book of Documents, which contained a chronicle of the sage kings of older generations, the Book of Odes, a Book of Rites, and the classic work I Ching, which is a manual of divination, really, and a history of the state of Lu during the spring and the spring and autumn annals as well. But the very best of Confucius can be found in the Confucian canon of the 5 classics in the 4 books. The Great Learning, the Analects, the Mencius, and the Doctrine of the Mean, also known as Maintaining the Proper Balance. This canon would later on become the basis of the civil examination system in the Han China dynasty. And this gave Confucius just something he'd always wanted, and his doctrine became the state doctrine for civil examination. And so in the end, he did get what he wanted, which is quite a testament to his writings. And how did the Han use the teachings of Confucius? Well, candidates were tested on their knowledge of their classics and literary style, implicitly on their ethical and cultural understanding, rather than just, having technical or political knowledge. And this reflects that Confucian ideal of the sage, that wise individual whose role is to bring the world into alignment with the Tao. And if you could find a sage who was also a political leader, you had finally tapped into something that could make life-altering change, not just for a person, but for an entire civilization. And so Confucius followed the Taoist tradition, which we discussed in detail in Lesson 5 when studying Lao Tse. So if you need a refresher, go back and have another look and another listen with that particular lecture. But But to Confucius, the entire cosmological order is a unity and includes our natural ethical inclinations. Moral conduct to Confucius consisted of acting in accordance with the Tao, or in accordance with this universal order, which is disrupted by immoral conduct. This also explains why Confucius and other thinkers in the Taoist tradition are so comfortable with the inclusion of nature and natural phenomena like the mountains and water in their ethical schemes. The allegories and references to the power of nature were always present in his works, as in the Taoist tradition, all things, all people are brothers. Harmony is achieved when all living things working, sharing, cooperating in an honest, ethical manner happen. Then we get society reaching toward its highest order. This is a tall ask, obviously, for any society in any time period, to say the least. And in a world of moral and political theory for Confucius, this means observing the rights. And I've been mentioning the rights now in Lesson 5 and again in Lesson 6, so let me rehash it just one more time real quick. So the rights. It's just a general term that the Taoist and many of these Chinese philosophers, whether Lao Tse or Confucius, talk about. And it's related to this notion of dignity, which includes a number of things. The correct performance of certain sacrifices or rituals, acting properly in public with the right demeanor, with the proper hygiene, having the right manners, the right respect for people, and so on. So these rights are ways upon which we should act and the way we should think. And if people don't follow a certain prescribed ethical decorum in their interactions, it literally becomes impossible for a government or a society to be ethical and moral when the individual people are not practicing these rights properly. So these rights were very important to Confucius and to Taoist thought. And like Aristotle, Confucius subscribed to this doctrine of the mean or the middle. Confucius quotes the ancient Chinese proverb, quote, "Going too far is as bad as not going far enough," end quote. So we also suggest another really important facet of his philosophy, and that of reciprocity, or treating others as we would like them to be treated. We know this in the West is the golden rule. And it provides just basic ethical rules to live by. That theory of the mean, don't get too high, don't get too low. And this idea of reciprocity or the golden rule. Hey, how about, here's one of the greatest ethics ever. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Act in a way that you would want to be treated. And these two are such basic cornerstone rules of ethical and moral wisdom. And they cut across almost every culture in one way, shape, or form. But Confucius is no different. Because for Confucius, both the golden mean and the golden rule, they fit perfectly into his philosophy in practicing the rights. So in regard to Confucius' moral theory, it's drenched with a very strong sense of duty. He urges us to become noble in mind and actions. He commonly uses the terms the gentleman or the man of authoritative conduct. To Confucius, we have a moral duty to act properly, not just for our own ethical conduct, but because that ethical conduct is required for a society to reach its highest state of being. And he contrasts this with this morally superior person with what he calls the little man. And this is a person characterized as petty, preoccupied with his own self-interest, greedy, deceptive. That little man joins ideological factions and plays politics for power, or just to get rich or wealth, or just straight up greed and control, while the noble mind keeps his desires in harmony. The little man is out to serve himself first, second, and third, but the noble mind is serving for the betterment of society. The noble mind has deep empathy and compassion for humanity, which I suppose, we could translate it to benevolence or being well-meaning and to be kind to other people, as these traits are at the core fundamental things that make us human. That little man is arrogant and greedy. The little man's been corrupted intellectually by the materialistic world that they find themselves. The little man has no time for compassion or empathy for his fellow citizens. He's too worried about getting his own. So when reading Confucius, it can almost come across, I don't know, maybe too naive or too simplistic. That Confucius argues that politicians, or even just average people for that matter, will act with a noble mind. Yet, this is the key Confucian virtue. The man acting with high morals, ethics, and compassion is morally and emotionally in accord with all things. And it takes these characteristics to truly lead a nation. So I want to rephrase that again for you. So to Confucius, if you're going to be a leader of the nation, you have to have high morals, you have to have high ethics, and you have to have compassion. If not, you're going to be a terrible, terrible leader. So like Lao Tse, Confucius sees an overdeveloped sense of self, some carefully orchestrated or architected image that the little man tries to portray to the world to convince them there's something they're not. It's some sort of an artificial scheme to manipulate and pretend to be something bigger or greater than the reality, with one goal, really, which is to control and have power. That fake little man is contrasted against the noble man of virtue that is upright and naturally and honestly influencing others for only the purpose for the good of all things. So the true sage, the true noble mind, is someone who is sincere and selfless. Only this person can transform the people for the good of society. Only this person, only this type of person should be allowed to lead a nation. Without the noble minds, without having noble minds ruling, the civilization is going to fall into decadence, greed, manipulation, corruption, and it will cause war. It will cause strife. It will cause internal division. It will cause anger and resentment and a lack of trust. And so think about this. In that regard, I think Confucius, thousands of years before the United States existed, I think Confucius nailed our modern political situation right now in America. I think most of us would agree we're incredibly divided. We don't trust what our politicians tell us. We see corruption all around us. We see greed. And we saw this this thirst for power from our politicians. So here we sit, reading from yet another of the great minds, one of the greatest minds to ever put pen to paper, and talking about the characteristics of a true leader. A person with integrity, honesty, empathy, humility, and intellectually strong. But I would dare say we get almost none of that at all from our modern world. Not even a little bit. So how in the world did we fail so miserably? What happened that trust in our politicians is gone? Survey after survey show that less than 15 to 20% of the population even trust anything that comes out of our politicians. How did this happen? What caused this brute collapse? Why can't we seem to get honest, ethical, upstanding figures to run the nation? Why do we have a bunch of geriatric dinosaurs who refuse to give up power, or ranting, raving young adults that still seem to act like children on social media and interviews about their political positions? Yes, I know it is a lot of questions to ask, but these are the thoughts that run through my mind when I consider our current political landscape in contrast to what we should expect from our politicians from Confucius. Look, I don't believe there's some, I do believe there are probably some honest and ethical people who enter politics. And I don't know whether it's a naive belief or a overhyped sense that they're going to make a change themselves, that they're going to change the system, that they're going to serve the people. I mean, I'm not that cynical to have such a terrible view of everyone entering politics, to think all of them want to turn into the next Chucky Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, or Mitch McConnell. However, the reality seems to be in Washington, D.C., you must conform to that cesspool of corruption and partisan ideology, or the newbies learn real quickly change that they had hoped for is not going to be possible. And they just decide they don't want to be part of that corruption, and they get the heck out of Dodge after a couple terms in their political career. They either succumb to the garbage of D.C. and they become one of them, or they get the heck out. Whereas Confucius and Lao Tse demand you can't be a leader with high ethical principles, humility, and dedication to the people. And if you don't have these principles, it's not possible for you to be a leader in Washington, D.C. The fact in Washington, D.C. is that a politician, they will conform, they will speak the party line, they will line up when called upon, and they will not bend nor negotiate with the enemy, the other party, or they won't make it in D.C. In a world where American politics is like a sporting event, one team wins, one team loses, only the most corrupt seem to be able to survive in that world. It seems there's little place in American politics for the noble mind, as Confucius describes. Is it any wonder, then, highly intelligent and ethical people stay away from the cesspool of Washington, D.C.? Whereas Confucius believes sage and intellectual minds are required in government, now in American politics, it seems the opposite is the case. You don't need some sage ethical intellect. What you need is a buffoon, loud, obnoxious, annoying loudmouth that spews venomous overgeneralizations and hyperbole just to score political points. Smart people, moral people, intellectual people would be disgusted by participating in that type of circus. It takes an inferior or little man, as Confucius called it, or heck, let's leave the gender pronouns out and say little person, to be and to survive in politics in Washington, D.C. It isn't that we don't have brilliant minds in the United States or ethical minds. I mean, we have many, many in the country. I mean, let's just say round number, we have 350 million people in the United States. Let's just say the top 1% of that 350 million that are the most brilliant and the most ethical, according to what Confucius is asking for. We only need, that's 3.5 million people. We only need about 300 or so to lock and load full the entire halls of Congress with brilliant and ethical minds, but yet really smart, really ethical and moral people. They just don't want anything to do with Washington, D.C. They just don't want to be there. Instead, we get a bunch of bumbling geriatric buffoons who simply won't step aside for younger minds and ideas to come on board, or we get these raging young ones that fit the party mold perfect, and they fall on the extremes of the left and right, and they're just wild-eyed, crazed people talking silly, ridiculous stuff. AOC comes to mind on the left, and there are others for sure on the right as well. Neither party is guilt-free in this. Both foster ideological zealotry that reeks of the worst religious fervor that existed through the Middle Ages and the Spanish Inquisition. It's scary. It's scary, and it lacks intellectual integrity. Smart people want nothing to do with politics. Yet this is exactly what the teachings of Confucius demand. It's a requirement for a government to run efficiently. It's so ironic that even Confucius saw the decaying morality in his own country's politicians. But I'm pretty sure he would just flat out pass out cold in astonishment if he spent a week listening to a rerun of a political debate. Say, the one that comes to mind to me the most was the first political debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden in the last election cycle. I mean, it was ghastly. It was embarrassing. It was pathetic. It was the most intellectually devoid circus from both of them that I have ever seen. Both sides were horrific. And if you had the painful experience of attempting to get anything of value from that debate, listening to it, you understand fully what I'm talking about. I remember even podcasting about that the day after it happened. I was stunned how bad it was. I do have to admit, obviously, if you can't tell, I don't like either the Republicans nor the Democrats. I would love to see an explosion of viable third party and independents wrangle political power from the aged, stagnant, poisonous political parties that we have. So when I hear Confucius mention that a real leader, a true leader, a noble leader, what they look like, I just want to give a loud amen. Smart people, intellectual minds, they simply just are not going to go into American politics in the state that we're in right now. And why would they? Change from these disgusting parties has been rendered nearly impossible. And intellectually smart people like to apply their mind's energy and money towards things that they can change, towards progress and success and growth. Their morality is too high. Their willingness to seek real solutions to serve the people, a requirement of Confucian teaching, it's not possible in D.C. Heck, anytime a politician dares to cross party lines and vote for something they believe to be right that doesn't exactly align with their party vote, heck, they're labeled traitors, and they're called in a manner, all kinds of horrible terms, and they're threatened, we need to kick this person out of our party, and so on. A noble mind of Confucian order just doesn't want to get pulled into the gutter of personal attacks, dragging a person's entire past into the public sphere from elementary school through dumb college decisions. Smart people just stay away, far away. A noble mind, like Confucius describes, just would not go into the gutter like that. I want to pull in just a couple of short readings on the morality of Confucius and what needs to happen to evil and pathetic politicians from the sayings of Confucius. This story comes from a person to kind of set the stage. So Confucius is being questioned about this certain politician and why he needs to be exiled out of the political arena. And Confucius explains it this way. Quote, "Sit down, and I will tell you the reason for this. In the world, there are 5 great evils in a man, not including theft and robbery. The first is called a heart, which is dangerous in rebelliousness. The second, a conduct, which is persistent in its depravity. The third, a speech, which is eloquent in its falsehood. The fourth, a comprehensive memory for wicked matters. The fifth, an obedience to wrong principles extending its influence." When of these 5 there is one in a man, then already he cannot escape punishment by a noble man. but the Shu Chang Mao had all of them combined. So Confucius believed this particular politician, he lacked everything. That's why he needed to be exiled. But Confucius, he believed in honor and integrity. He wasn't a pacifist, though, either, as sometimes the only solution to immorality in politics was punishment and expulsion so that the people were served properly. I want to go over just one more thing from the readings to give you more flavor on Confucius. Quote, "Let the ruler first establish goodness within himself. Only then the great officers will be loyal, the knights dependable, the people sincere, their customs simple, the men guileless, and the women chaste. This is where the teachings lead. Stratify them through the rites, establish them through justice, and practice them through accommodation. And the people will throw off wickedness as if hot water were poured on snow. In ancient times, the king's officials promoted and employed the worthy and good and degraded the unworthy. They had pity and compassion. The people cherished the ruler's virtue. Those nearby gladly submitted themselves. Those afar came to show their adherence." I mean, it is a beautiful philosophy, an ideal that our politicians should strive. The biggest thing here for me is if that politician at his core is not noble-minded, doesn't have humility, a duty to serve, wanting to do the best for people, if he doesn't get that right, he or she doesn't have that right in their mind, nothing that follows could possibly work. And if in that rare, amazing instance, you could load Congress with people with the right mindset going in, you could change the entire landscape of a civilization forever. I think for me, after reading through the thoughts of Confucius in chapter 6 of the book, this idea of political corruption, from the intellectual corruption and the stagnation of thought caused by the ideological zealots from the far left and far right, they speak so directly to the warning of Confucius. So as I read the moral wisdom, do I see an out in the United States of America, a glimmer of hope? Do I see a redemptive possibility that could emerge onto the American political scene and rescue us from this horrific and horror of divisions and lies and just outright corruption? Sadly, I don't. I'm not a fatalist. I'm not some nihilistic Debbie Downer or one of those the world's going to end people. I just despise the doom and gloom pornography of our media and politicians that they shovel at us every day. What we're calling democracy today, I don't believe is democracy. When vote after vote after vote is a vote for the least worst candidate, we don't have a true choice. The choices are force-fed down our throats by the Democrats and Republicans. Yeah, and I do blame the parties. The parties act like a parent telling a little kid to drink the medicine for your own good. I see no solution as long as the two political powers we have, the Republicans and Democrats, as long as these two powers are in place without challenge, all hope is lost for true meaningful change. And the two-party system that we have, the party faithfuls screaming that they'll support their party no matter what at any cost and completely ignore facts or justify horrible behavior to blindly follow their party for irrational fear of the other side winning. I have no solution to that. I can't argue with that. I can't rationally or intellectually convince anybody that's not right. I mean, you can't argue or convince radicals. Saddens me deeply is when reading these wisdom texts this week, it reinforced how utterly far and how utterly low the expectations are that we have for our politician, and how far we are from having any semblance of an intellectual democracy. But such is the reality. I leave you well. I leave you sadly with not much of a solution. Yet I hope you enjoyed reading the works of Confucius. And I hope you find a way, because if there is an out, if there is a solution, I hope you find a way to internalize the teachings of Confucius in your life. As if there is a message of hope from reading in lesson 6, it just has to be the fact that in your life, in your world, you can apply so much of these amazing teachings. And here I hope it helps you become the best you that you can be. Even if you're watching this slow, disgusting death march that our two horrid political parties have us marching down. We do still control our own thoughts and actions, and we can be that noble mind Confucius desires in all of us. So for now, if you haven't read the readings yet, by all means do it. And if you don't have the book, Readings in Ethics, check out the works and the additional readings. I put down there a link that lets you access the Analects from Confucius for free, thanks to MIT. They actually have it published out there for you, and you can access it at no charge. You don't even have to register for it. Of course, the book that I'm reading from, that one abbreviates down the longer work to more concise main points, like I've been talking about here in this lecture today. But if you don't have the book, still for free, you can deep dive into these amazing works. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you'll invest some time even answering some of the discussion questions. And with that, have yourself a wonderful week.